what I've done is to introduce the subject. I'm going to actually use a set of slides, a deck of slides, to put forth some ideas about Pune's aquifer system, some early lessons from this whole effort, but couch it in the larger context of urban aquifers for urban water security. And this is part of a much larger initiative going on for the last possibly 3 years or so, but more focused work over the last year and a half. So sort of joint collaboration between Mission Groundwater, CEE and Aquadam. And at different points in time, all these three organizations have been supported by the Wipro Foundation. At the moment, we also have an ongoing 4.5-year project at Aquadam. And I think Mission Groundwater also has a similar, smaller project on precisely the whole issue around groundwater in Pune. And how do we deal with that? So it's almost like an action research program. And we'll talk a little more in detail about it as we go along. So a little introduction to Aquadam's work. Many of you know this, but just quick reiteration. We work through partnerships. I mean, all our work is based on partnership and collaboration. And over the last 22 years, we've forged about 350 different partnerships across India's diverse groundwater landscape. I should call it waterscape. We work on the science of aquifers, and on the other side, we work on community-led participatory groundwater management. We do a lot of training. We work informally in the education sector, formally also in the education sector. All our work on the ground is through the lens of what we call action research. And such action research leads to decision support to communities and groups on the ground. And we also thereby incidentally work on policies and programs. Our goal is to bring communities and aquifers as close to each other as possible. Groundwater, to my mind, has been in the shadows of many, many other issues. I would say it has been hidden in India for the last 50 to 70 years under the larger context of rivers, lakes, and reservoirs. Despite the fact that India is the largest user of groundwater in the world today, a quarter of the annual groundwater extraction happens in India. India became the largest user of groundwater in the 1980s. And it's only after about 35 to 40 years that we are waking up to this whole reality. So India became the largest user of groundwater in the 1980s. And I was saying, we've only recently woken up to this stark reality or the stark contrast between what we depend on more and what we focus on more. And I think this paradox itself has led to many, I would say, negative consequences. Anyway, better late than never, and we are into it now. I think Government of India has also woken up to this fact, and there's the aquifer mapping program that the CGWB is conducting. There's the Atal Bhujal Yojana, and the new guidelines of the Jal Jeevan Mission also provide a little more focus on groundwater in more ways than one. These are 3 programs which have accorded groundwater its rightful place in the sun after about 70 years. And I don't say this without reason, because I'm going to sort of play a short video for you, which is like a cartoon of how, a cartoon depiction of India's unique groundwater story. India's groundwater story is quite unique. India extracts almost a quarter of the global extraction of groundwater.
And what makes this story unique is the fact that India was not such a groundwater dependent country even at the time of independence. When India became independent, our vision of water management was about dams and constructing dams and canals in order to take water to people. But I believe that didn't happen for various reasons, and therefore the last mile connectivity, the last mile delivery of water wasn't achieved for many years. So the gap was actually filled by groundwater. Subsequently, in the 1950s and 60s, as the push for green revolution in terms of achieving food security increased, technology kicked in. And in the hard rock areas of India, for example, the borewell technology came. Droughts were also a factor or a stimulus for technology. For instance, the 1971-72 drought in Maharashtra and in large parts of western and southern India prompted infusion of the hand pump for access to drinking water. And in order to actually put in a hand pump, we brought in the technology of borewell in hard rock regions of India. Technology proliferates very rapidly. And the technology that came in for drinking water sourcing in the drought-prone regions of India quickly was taken up as technology that could access water for all regions. Urban, industrial, and moreover agriculture. As we deepened our existing wells and we drilled deeper through our boreholes, our groundwater extraction really grew. Around the 1980s and subsequently even in the 1990s, with the advent of electric pumps, especially with the advent of submersible pumps, people could actually drill deeper, put in pumps at whatever depth they wanted and extract water from greater and greater depths. So in some ways it was a race to drill deeper and a race to the pump house to almost install pumps of higher capacities and so on and so forth. So today India is perhaps the largest user of groundwater in the world, which is a well-known fact. But we also have the largest density of wells, so roughly 30 to 40 million wells in India. And we kind of have technologies that can access water from depths of thousands of feet, making it a very, very unique proposition.
So I think what the video was trying to depict is, the entire evolution of India's water story in terms of post-independence, the call for large dams, the call for large projects, and the realization in the 80s and 90s that there's another story which has gone unnoticed, which is the story of groundwater. And that's essentially what the video shows, so much so that India's groundwater dependency today, if you look at the dependency factors, more than 90% of rural groundwater, rural water supplies in India, drinking water supplies, come from groundwater. 70% of the water in agriculture is groundwater. 50% or nearly half of the water supplies in cities and towns, half of urban water supplies in India are met from groundwater, and possibly half in the industrial sector. Now, because we are going to focus today on urban groundwater, when we talk of half of the urban water supplies in India being met from groundwater, it has different consequences in the 5,700 odd cities and towns of India. fundamentally because these 5,700 cities and towns are distributed across 6 or 7 different aquifer settings. And therefore, what that 50% means from a resource point of view is actually going to be dependent on what are the aquifers beneath these 5,700 towns. And I think that is what we need to focus on if we are going to look at the diversity in these aquifer systems, and therefore the diversity and the variability in what this 50% means. Now, over the last few days, we at Aquadam, we actually attempted a very interesting exercise in terms of what does the rural and the urban, how does the rural and urban water supply compare? And while these figures are approximate, let me actually take you very quickly through this exercise. So we looked at the density of rural and urban populations. And we came up with figures like, let's say, if you take the sort of city of Pune and the neighborhood regions of Pune, especially the Haveli Taluka, then the average population is around 1,000, typically in a village in this region. The population of Pune is about 4 million. Then we took the average areas of the village and the city. And we looked at the density of population. So it's a very interesting graphic, because when you bring in persons per hectare and then you start calculating the demand, and I have a few surprises for you in the next few slides based on this calculation. Now what we did is we looked at the annual domestic demand. We've sort of calculated that in cubic meters. So if you look at sort of these figures here, at 55 liters per capita per day and at 150 liters per capita per day, we got 20,000 and we got 220 million, just as a comparative gross figure. If you convert that into millimeters of water, then you get 2 mm and 876 mm. Now, in both the cases, it's the drinking or the domestic water demand. And I think we must look at figures in comparative terms. And later on, if people are interested, I can explain how we have arrived at these figures. But this actually makes for a very useful comparison, because when you look at the water balance, a demand-based water balance in, say, a typical village. Now, what this figure is telling us is the domestic demand, like I said, is 2 millimeters per year. Is 2 millimeters per year in this case. Now, a typical basalt aquifer in the region where we are stores about anywhere between 20 to 150 millimeters equivalent of groundwater. So essentially, if you get 1,000 millimeters of rain, then aquifer, and if you want to completely saturate your aquifer, it's going to take you about anywhere between 20 and 150, maybe 100 millimeters of water for you to saturate that aquifer. And against that, if you look at this entire graphic, it shows you a total demand of 528 millimeters. As against this, you jump to the urban, and your demand pie, the demand distribution pie, changes completely. If you add human drinking water and your household domestic water, it gives you, it takes you, the earlier figure was somewhat conservative, but it takes you to 1,000 millimeters per year. Now, 1,000 millimeters is not even the rainfall you receive. And I think in the urban context specifically, I want to begin by stating that we must do something with our water demand. Because we will otherwise, with these figures, need exogenous water. We'll need more and more exogenous water, which all of the people in the room know is going to be unsustainable. Now, how much of that is supported by groundwater, because we simply do not have enough exogenous water to support a demand like this. And therefore, again, on a comparative scale, 100 millimeters is what you would get from your shallow aquifer, from the main aquifers below towns and cities in India. Now, just to put those figures in a slightly different perspective, what I have done in simple terms is we look at the density of urban growth on 1 hectare of land. So for example, what kind of habitation you have on 1 hectare of land. And I modeled this in simple terms. So what I did was I modeled different densities, and for each set of densities, I calculated the annual water demand. I'm afraid maybe it's not too clear, but you see these red sort of bars here? That's the annual water demand, and that's the population density. So I took a variable population density, and against that, for different differential per capita demands, I actually calculated the total water demand. That's again in millimeters. Now, this is the average annual rainfall for Pune city. If we take that as a kind of a benchmark, the rainfall, then wherever you have, and if you notice, if you recollect, Pune's density today is about 130 per hectare, which is somewhere there. So we've kind of just reached a limit of our rainfall. What it means is if we capture all our rainfall, we are probably just going to break even in terms of the demand. However, in some places, for example, the place where I live, the densities are not 130. The density actually is something like 500 per hectare. And that means that, in fact, it's more. I think where I live, it's about 800 to 900 per hectare, and which means that the demand is far, far above the annual precipitation. I find it because we do a lot of work in rural areas ourselves on groundwater. And we find that when we come to towns in India, just the other day, I had a friend who was telling me how the farmers of India are looting us. These are exactly his words. And I was explaining to him that a farmer who is cultivating sugarcane or paddy or banana on 1 hectare of land actually has the same footprint that my housing society has on 1 hectare of land. Possibly my housing society has a much larger footprint purely out of basic demand than what the farmer is growing. And I think it is important for us to bring in a demand-based calculation of water to really make justifiable comparisons across the board. Because increasingly, I've actually done this for example, for this demand, you can grow sugarcane. For this demand, you can grow sugarcane, paddy or banana. For this demand, you can grow wheat, maize or onion. For this demand, you can grow beans and millets on 1 hectare of land. And I think this is also a way of looking at productivities and looking at efficiencies of demand. This is just plotting it in another way. So I'll just skip this just to sort of give you a sense of how this demand has a sort of exponential relationship. If you look at this demand and if you look at the densities have to be plotted on a log scale for you to really fathom what it means. Now, because I took 1 hectare of land, I'm now going to sort of show you how it compares in terms of potential aquifer storages under 1 hectare of land. We saw the demand. We saw how the demand varies over 1 hectare of land. Now, under 1 hectare of land, in different aquifer settings across India, so if you take, say, the mountain settings of the Himalayas, where small towns are now sort of metamorphosed, they are into a metamorphosis stage, where they are transiting into larger towns. So in the mountain systems, under 1 hectare of land, typically you will get about 30 to 40 cubic meters of water, and so on. Whereas in an alluvial aquifer in the Indo-Gangetic plains, you are likely to have 100,000, yeah, it's 100,000 cubic meters of groundwater storage under that 1 hectare of land. And I think this is the reason why we need to adopt an aquifer-based approach when we deal with groundwater, whether in rural areas or urban areas. The context is urban here. So if you look at this variability, it goes from 10 to 100,000. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 orders of magnitude. The variability in aquifer storage in India is of the order of 5, by 5 orders of magnitude. So therefore, you cannot have a common approach to managing groundwater in India. Let me now quickly take you through, beginning with Bengaluru, where some years back we worked with Biome Trust, and we were supported by Wipro, and we came up with mapping a set of aquifers for Bengaluru city. And we came up with a shallow unconfined aquifer, an intermediate set of systems, and a fairly deep system. These are all confined aquifers. This is an unconfined aquifer. On similar lines, we sort of now want to work in different parts of India, and this is the aquifer typology of India. These are the towns and cities that are distributed in this aquifer setting or typologies. So this is the setting. Now, when we came to Pune, we actually began with an interesting model that we know that we are located in a basaltic region, and basalt lavas show alternate units which have vertical and horizontal jointing patterns. They are often traversed by regional fracture systems, which you can depict in this form. So you have different layers of basalt, and then you have these fracture systems. Just different kinds of basalts, a few pictures. Almost devoid of any fractures, joints. Largely vertical fractures, and largely horizontal fractures. So based on this, then you have the regional fracture systems or fracture zones that are depicted here. Based on this field observation, we actually can map out any terrain. So this is a Google Earth image, this is a real image. We can map out any terrain and the subterranean for any place. So we've done something similar for Pune. To begin with, so these are the drainage lines, and we also got help about some of these maps from Dr. Gabale here. What we also did was we mapped out the geology for the region. So this is a very detailed geological map based on what I just said. Now what we also found was these are the watersheds, based on the drainage map. The yellow, the orange, the greens here are the watersheds. And I'll just tell you what these other things are. So this was Pune 100 years ago, and as the city grew, we saw these urban circles expand. Today we are somewhere there. So essentially, in 100 years, we have built upon nearly 85% of the watersheds that bring water into the city, and we have built upon almost 100% of the recharge zones for the 5 main aquifers that feed Pune city. This is what we realized. And therefore, one of the things we realized was the need for rainwater harvesting linked to water sources. And in India, we have a tradition of rainwater harvesting going back 3,000, 4,000 years. And we've also had the opportunity to study that. Now, why is there a need for rainwater harvesting? I'm now coming to certain solutions to the problem. So, one of the things you don't realize in cities and towns is the fact that as we keep building on these surfaces, we realize that there is a reduction in surfaces that induce infiltration of rainwater. Second, there is also a great chance of leaking sewers and leaking mains, water supplies. Now, what it means, together what these two means, is we are operating in what I call a zero-sum game. Essentially, if you measure water levels in large cities and towns, you find that the water levels have not gone down. One of the reasons that water levels have not gone down, I would say the main reasons why water levels have not gone down is not because there is a reduction in recharge. There's actually a reduction in recharge which has been offset by the leaking mains and sewers. And that creates a false impression that all is well. So this zero-sum game leads to a very different set of responses. So in Pune city, for example, we mapped out the whole system, and using a simple model, we came up with aquifer 1, 2, 3, aquifer 4, and aquifer 5. The main aquifers. It's a different cross-section there. And we modeled it on the basis of a very well-established basalt aquifer system, which looks at a sort of impermeable layer there, a confined aquifer, and an unconfined aquifer. That's the model we used for Pune. And we looked at the 5 aquifers. We also looked at a few aquifers at somewhat greater depths. But the main 5 aquifers and their recharge areas are depicted here. We've also installed about 20 sensors in different parts of Pune city. And these 20 sensors over the last almost 2 years have given us some very, very interesting data. So you can actually also see the aquifer-wise depiction of water levels. So in aquifer 1, we hardly see any fluctuation. In aquifer 2, the fluctuations are slightly more. And in aquifer 3, we get a phenomenally large amount of fluctuations. Of course, these are also divided into confined and unconfined systems. And these are the relatively newer sensors that we've installed. So you see that in some, there's hardly any fluctuation that's happening. In others, look at the fluctuation. And mind you, the scales are similar for all the for all these sensors. So we actually have an aquifer-wise system, which we would be very glad to share with anyone who's interested. So all this data will be out in the public domain very shortly. We are also, we are hoping to work very closely with CGWB and GSDA and other agencies in this whole data sharing exercise. And I think this may be the first of its kind where we'll actually have a lot of aquifer-based data in the public domain. And there's more that we make from this data. The other effort that we are taking, and we'll see a lot more on these presentations, is doing away with this concept of recharge as simply pushing water into the ground through a pipe. We want to move away from that, because that is what it has come to symbolize in many parts. I mean, I have heard people saying, "वो आप recharge करते हो क्या है? पानी ले लो roof का, वो एक पाइप में डालो और अंदर घुसा दो." This is exactly the language that was used. Now, imagine if you use a similar language in the pandemic today with the medical fraternity. Imagine what would happen. I don't want to use that language. But unfortunately, I say this with a lot of passion because this is a science that has been trampled and trampled upon by many, many people in this country. And I think this is an opportunity for us to bring back the science of aquifers through the concept of systematic recharge. So we do away with this, no more of this argument, and we look at recharge as the proper systematic addition of groundwater to the aquifer storage. I think we must change the language. If we change the language, we can get to something called managed aquifer recharge, which is intentional or designed recharge of water to the aquifers for subsequent recovery, for meeting anthropogenic needs, and for environmental benefit. It's also the managed process that strives for adequate protection of human health and the environment. And aquifers may be recharge by diversion of water into wells, or infiltration of water through flow basin, galleries, or rivers. And I think when we adopt this practice, the international practice, it's not just about pushing water into the ground, it actually has 7 different processes. If you're doing it as a part of rooftop rainwater harvesting, so there is this part, the recharge part, and there's also the recovery part, which is the demand. We've attempted something like this, the second part. So through a check dam, for example. And this is what we'll actually go and see tomorrow. In terms of how we are looking at this entire process, not just about pushing water into the ground, it's about managing your surface water at the right place, recharging it to the aquifer, which is essentially your storage, and extraction also needs to be monitored so that we get to the demand side of things. We want to take this up, so we want to begin with recharge, and I think we need to look at recharge at different scales. We'd like to look at it at the scale of one single structure. We'd like to look at it at the scale of an aquifer, 5 aquifers in Pune city, for example. We'd like to look at it through the lens of watersheds, the 30-odd watersheds that bring water into Pune city. And as a larger part, we would also like to look at a river basin scale recharge, because I think now that the new DP has been announced, Pune is slated to become the largest urban agglomeration in Maharashtra, even larger than Mumbai. It was in the newspapers the other day. Therefore, we must also look at Pune as a part of the larger Bhima Basin. And when we look at the PMRDA structure, I think we need to approach that at a different scale. So the 3 or 4 questions that one must ask, and what we've asked ourselves, is where do you recharge? How much do you recharge? Or how much can you recharge? Because recharge is not a function of how much rain you receive. Recharge is a function of how much you can store in your aquifer. And your aquifer must become the focus of your recharge, not your rain. I know I'm making a seemingly radical statement, but it is not as radical as some of you may think. Recharge is a function of the aquifer and not a function of the rain. Rain, precipitation, surface water are only means of recharging the aquifer. And therefore, how do you do it? At what scales can you do it? Can you do it at the scale of one well? Can you do it at the scale of a housing society, a cluster of society, a ward, or even an urban watershed? And I think if we progressively go along these steps, we'll be able to reach a more systematic and systemic means of recharge than what we are looking at today. And I think, like I talked about the importance of aquifers, to end, I'm just going to show you 2 slides for Pune city. And they are plotted in different ways. So what we did was, we looked at, our fundamental division was, I think this is area, and this also I think is area. So these are aquifers. So 5 is green, and 1 is red. 1, 2, 3, 4. So housing societies, if we go by housing societies, we are actually looking at how many housing societies, or this is frequency. How many housing societies, for example, if you go by housing societies, then Aquifer 2, the recharge area for Aquifer 2 has the highest number of housing societies, and so on. There's another way we've plotted this, which is aquifer wise. So for each aquifer, for the recharge area for each aquifer, we actually have the land cover. So if you look at open plots, then open plots is blue. Then the largest number of open plots are in the recharge area of aquifer 5. That's 25%. But almost in all the aquifers, you have open plots. And therefore, can you think of a public recharge system to look at recharge? I'll just end by, bringing it to a logical inference. The whole process of recharge is big, but recharge alone will not solve the problem. Managing water in the aquifers through community participation defines the tenet of what we call as participatory groundwater management. So we need to manage recharge. We need to manage demand by reducing usage, changing patterns of the usage, and bringing in a strong concept of reduce, recycle, and recharge. 3, can we bring in efficiencies in the supply and usage of groundwater? And in order to do that, I'm not going to actually explain the whole slide, but we've decided on bringing up a set of principles and clear objectives linked to each principle for an improved system of urban groundwater management in India. Citizens' participation is something that my colleague Manoj and also our friends from Bhujal Abhiyan and CEE will talk about. But I think it's important for us to get into a mission on water literacy. We need to bring in participatory measurement and monitoring. We need to design decision support systems and actions at community levels. And mind you, right now, it shouldn't be virtual only. We wanted to do this about a year back, but hopefully we'll be able to take this forward. I see 3 phases: mapping, management, and governance. We've started with this. We've also done a little bit on the strategic recharge activities. And we are talking to the PMC, the PCMC, to bring in a better governance. 2 years ago, this was only a wish list. This was only a hope, but we've made progress on phase 1 and a little bit on phase 2. Hopefully, in the year to come, we might even begin to see some action on phase 3. Thank you.